It's not only the volcano adapting our operations to whatever the volcano is doing and where it's doing it, but it's also dealing with the consequences from the volcano itself. The biologists were like, oh yeah, we could use a chemist to do some chemistry work for us. And I go, no, that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, you're like, no. It's just cool because I, learned about volcanoes in like elementary and middle school. And so it's that kid curiosity peaking. Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where we uncover the untold stories of our national parks. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice, gear up for adventure with Expert Voice, the outdoor gear source for industry experts. Outdoor brands like Big Agnes, Mammoth, La Sportiva, Chaco, and more offer discounts on Expert Voice of up to 60% off for industry experts like you. And you can join Expert Voice for free today and see what brands you qualify for. So, whatever the next adventure calls for, make sure you're prepared with expertvoice.com/parks and gear up for adventure. If you like chocolate, which may be a red flag if you don't, you have to try out Ritual Chocolate. Ritual Chocolate is my favorite chocolate brand by far, and I learned about them from spending a lot of time in Park City, Utah, where they're based nearby, and actually got to take my family to a chocolate tasting at their factory. And it totally changed the way we all think about and eat small batch chocolate. While I already loved the bars, it opened up my world to the variety and depth of flavor profiles chocolate can have. I'm excited to be sharing this with you all. Who Runs This Park listeners get 10% off their online purchases of Ritual Chocolate. Go to ritualchocolate.com, that's RITUAL chocolate.com, and use promo code WRTP for 10% off. You'll be thanking me later, I promise. And did I mention that I'm obsessed with their packaging? It's so beautiful, so even just having the bars and opening them is a treat. Get on it and order some chocolate. Today we have Rhonda Loh with us, Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park superintendent. Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park is located on the Big Island in Hawaii, rising from sea level to an elevation of over 13,000 feet. It encompasses two of the world's most active volcanoes, includes 7 ecological zones, and is home to 54 threatened and endangered species. The park is famous for its recent and historic lava flows, creating an ever-changing landscape. Rhonda, a local girl from Hawaii, has been Hawaiʻi Volcanoes superintendent since December 2020 and has been working and volunteering in the park since 1989. Today, we get a glimpse into the tip of the iceberg of her 3.5 decades of knowledge in the park, including her exposure to roles across the park, from a botanist to chief of natural resource management to where she is today as superintendent. Rhonda, it's an honor to be chatting with you today. Welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here and be able to share some of my story and how wonderful this park is.
Yeah, I'm excited. A way to start into that and get into that is I'd love to hear about one of the craziest situations you've dealt with as Hawaiʻi Volcanoes superintendent. I'm sure there's a lot.
If crazy means amazing, then there's been a lot of experiences, but I would say my first official day on the job was pretty amazing. It was a Sunday, December 20th. So I didn't actually have to report to work till the next day, but somewhere around 10 in the evening, I got a phone call from the USGS Hawaiʻi Volcanoes Observatory scientist in charge telling me he thought something was happening in terms of an eruption. And we hadn't had an eruption in the park since May 2018. So it'd been a pretty quiet period, and I was thinking I'd have a pretty slow start when I started this job, but it didn't happen that way. Instead, we had that eruption that first night. The chief ranger and I, and whatever rangers we could assemble, we just scrambled over there. And already there were people coming into the park because word of mouth spreads pretty fast. And this lava lake and these fountains of lava, red lava, were appearing in Halemaumau crater. And this was a closed area, and people had gathered along the rim, myself included, and we watched this spectacle appear, and the entire sky was bright red. It was like a sunset, but it was almost midnight, and it was this roaring of the fissures as they erupted and the glow on the sky and the excitement with people gathering there. I think to put it in context, we had just come out of pandemic, a COVID isolation. There weren't a lot of people who had been in the park. We didn't have a lot of visitors on the island even. And people were still used to being isolated. And suddenly to have this crowd gathering and sharing this amazing phenomena, you felt like you were part of this community. And it was a special. You could really feel everybody coming together, experiencing this. And I thought, what a way to start my first day on the job, with a reminder of why this park exists and the responsibilities to take care of this area and to share those opportunities to experience it with the community and the public at large. It was a crazy way to start your first day of work.
What an intro. Like you said, you had thought it would maybe be an easy ramp up and you were just thrown into the deep end, and that's amazing.
It'd been 2 years since our last eruption, and it seemed like things were pretty quiet, which was a great way to ease myself into the position, but that wasn't to be. You just have to laugh.
It's an amazing phenomenon. There's two things that are coming to mind. You and I, before we started recording, started talking a little bit about one of the backpacking trips I took in college was in Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park. I remember we did it along the coastline a little bit. We hiked down to the beach and then hiked along the coastline for a couple of days. I remember sleeping on the sand and looking up and seeing what you describe as like
the glow from the volcano.
Yeah. And it was January of 2018. So it was right before the eruptions that happened that May. Yeah. So when you were talking about the way that you guys watching the eruptions lit up the sky, I can only imagine, because that was when the volcano wasn't even erupting.
You could get up close, very close to the rim and look down and see these fountains of lava, red lava, and you could hear the roar of the eruption and the crackling as that hot lava came in contact to that cold air, and the whole sky was aglow. You didn't need a flashlight to navigate.
So
it was
cool.
just, it was like being in an infrared at night.
Yeah. This might be a silly question, but how is it safe to be watching the eruption? How do you know that it's not going to blow up more than that?
That's one of the unique things about this park is the long history of people coming up to the summit of Kīlauea and witnessing these eruptions close hand. For decades, hundreds of years, even before the park was established, people would come up and watch the eruptions in the crater. They'd view it from above. It's not to say that there aren't the potential for risk to visitors or employees. What we really rely on is we work very closely with US Geological Survey. Their Hawaiian Volcanoes Observatory field station was in the park, and the scientists come up every day. We have probably the most instrumented volcanoes are on Kīlauea and Mauna Loa, and we talk to them weekly, if not on a daily or multiple times a day when things are changing, to evaluate what the risks are. And, there's certain sections of the park that we've had closed, especially the inside crater of Kīlauea, since 2008, because we, from what we're seeing from the data and the scientists, that is the area where eruptions are more likely to happen. And so it does take a lot of close collaboration with the scientists and reevaluation on a regular basis on where we can put people safely to view these eruptions when they happen.
This is a great segue into one of my questions about the volcanic activity. How do you evaluate and on a deeper level work with that USGS group to evaluate the volcanic activity, and when it is erupting versus when it's not erupting or being active? Is it something you're monitoring every day?
It's something the scientists at USGS are monitoring every day, 24 24/7. And in fact, you can go to their website and you'll see the instruments live, constantly going. And when there's changes in activity, either upward or downward, they'll notify us and we'll have a discussion about where they think things might show up, what the potential is. And then we also internally, our park staff have a conversation on where we can put people safely in the event of something to pop up. And sometimes, we'll be preemptive. We'll take the side of caution and proactively close areas in anticipation of something coming up. Doesn't always happen. When it does, we want to be prepared. We'd rather be safe than sorry.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. What has the volcanic activity looked like in your tenure as superintendent? You obviously had the welcoming volcanic activity your first day. And then I think last month, actually, there was some activity.
Right. So it's going through a different period, a different kind of phase. My understanding, talking to scientists, it's in a different phase than when it was 2008 to 2018. In that period, there were these two eruptions that were fairly constant. And so those were one at the summit caldera, Kīlauea, and then there was also an eruption on the eastern flank of Kīlauea. And so those are pretty regular. Then in May 2018, after you visited, all of that changed and the magma withdrew from inside the park and actually showed up as an eruption out of the park. And that was all over the world news.
I know. I think I actually saw that.
Yeah, it was very destructive and it destroyed a lot of structures and homes outside of the park. And then we went through a lull where nothing happened and for almost 2 years. And so now the magma seems to be manifesting itself in eruptions back inside the park, mostly in the summit area.
Okay.
And then what was remarkable was we had our first eruption on Mauna Loa, which is the bigger mountain in the park, inside the park
Yeah.
boundaries. We had our first eruption in, I think, over 30 years, since the
Wow.
mid-70s. We had a lot of forewarning from the scientists that seismic activity was elevating. And so they went from green to yellow advisory. And then probably 6 weeks before the eruption actually occurred, they let us know that they thought things were picking up. And that for us was a trigger to actually close the backcountry in the Mauna Loa summit area. And then, it actually happened, which is a perfect scenario. That's the kind of scenario you want, where you get the forewarning.
Yeah.
You get people out of there and then you wait and then it actually happens and you're in a pretty good place, while you wait.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a good scenario. And then it's been unusually, we get a lot of pauses and then bursts of activity on Kīlauea. So last year we had almost half a dozen phases where it paused and then erupted and paused and erupted. And it's a really interesting thing when that happens because the community, the people from off island and even from on the mainland or elsewhere besides the US will start flying over because they want to see these eruptions. It's a pretty amazing swing in operations for us because usually we're open 24 hours, but the bulk of our visitors come in during the day. But when we actually have these summit eruptions, we see a lot of nighttime visitation because nighttime, the lava flows, the red glow, it's very spectacular. And it's a real challenging time for us in terms of park operations because we suddenly have to pivot to meet the needs of the visitor during the night. And it's a lot of extra hours and trying to bring on additional folks on short notice. I will say the staff here and our partners are pretty amazing. They are very experienced now, having gone through these cycles. They know exactly what to do. They do get a little tired, but I think they also realize how much the visitors and the community appreciate these opportunities. And this is park service. Service is in the name. And so the people here who are part of the park are here because they want to serve the community and the resources. And so there's a lot of love they step up to the plate. Yeah, I feel pretty fortunate to be working with the people I do.
If I remember correctly, when I was there in January 2018, it was still steaming a little bit and then it had that red glow at night, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's active, right?
Well, what was going on was there was a lava lake, but it was very deep in this caldera, Halema'uma'u. You couldn't actually look in deep enough to actually see the lava lake unless it rose. And so you would have these periods where sometimes the lava lake rose and you could see it from the public viewing areas. And that's when you would get these fantastic turnouts of people. But other times it would be lower down in the caldera. And so you would mostly see the glow at night. With these current eruptions, they've put out so much volume over the last, well, since 2020, since I started, they put up so much volume. The lava lake is much shallower. It's higher up in the crater. In the most recent eruptions, you've been able to see it from pretty much anywhere along the crater rim.
Wow.
Right. And so the viewing is really spectacular. I think there was one time last year where people could sit in the volcano house and actually see it from there or so it was
Wow.
pretty spectacular.
Yeah, that's amazing. One more kind of question on the volcanic activity. This might be going too into the weeds, but I'm curious because I don't know a ton about this. What type of things is USGS measuring to like determine volcanic activity?
Right. So I'm going to give you my layman interpretation of what they do.
That is, I think that probably works. I don't know if any deeper I'd be like, I don't know.
So they measure what they call inflation and deflation. So as pressure builds, as the magma chambers fill up in the mountain, they'll start to inflate or push upward. And then as if magma drains, they'll start deflating. And they can measure them. They're very sensitive instruments. The other thing they'll measure is seismicity because they'll see tremors or quakes. Most common are magnitudes 1 and 2s. 3s are not uncommon, and as the seismicity increases in frequency, magnitude, that also tells them something's happening different in terms of the way magma is moving, maybe coming up to the surface or moving somewhere underneath. Those are the main two ways that I guess I pay attention to when they talk to me about how the instruments are moving.
I know. I feel like I'm in it's just cool because I learned about volcanoes in like elementary and middle school. And so it's that kid curiosity peaking in me of like, oh yeah, remembering all those things.
They have live webcams too that they put out so they can see, because a lot of times if the eruptions are not in easily accessible areas, they might see a big seismic action and they'll wonder, okay, did something actually break through? So they have these cameras. They'll also fly over, but if it's at night, they're going to rely on other ways. And so if you go to their webpage, you'll see these live cams along with the instrument data in real time.
Yeah, that's cool. It makes sense, but I'm surprised to learn, or it's interesting that people are literally tracking the activity and will last minute book a flight all the way to Hawaii to see it. So that's pretty spectacular.
There are volcano watchers or groupies that are, I guess their alarms set up and linked to the USGS monitoring data. And often they'll see things in the same time as the scientists.
Yeah, their own version of scientists. They like write in, they're like, we're thinking that there's some volcanic activity coming. You're like, oh.
You're right.
We just got a report and you're correct. Can you share a little bit about kind of your first experience at the park? My understanding is that you were a volunteer and then it kind of transitioned into a full-time role. I'd love to hear about that, kind of what led to that and what experiences catalyzed that desire to work at the park full-time.
I grew up in Honolulu. My mom's side is from Hawaiʻi Island, where this park is located. It never occurred to me to have a career in the Park Service. It wasn't something that I really thought about growing up as a local girl. You people to the park when you had visitors in town. I think the first time I saw this park, I was probably about 7. The volcano was going off, and my uncle drove me up there, and I remember him taking me at night and watching this lava flow at night. And well, obviously it was a vivid memory. And then I didn't even
Right.
think
I mean,
about this
especially at
park.
7, that's
Right. And but then later on, I'd finished college. I ended up majoring in chemistry. And then I went to pursue a doctorate at Stanford in biophysical chemistry. And I kind of I enjoyed it, and I really like the outdoors. Everybody in Northern California likes camping, so I got into
yeah,
camping and working,
right.
going to national parks and hiking. I wasn't convinced that my destiny lay in biophysical chemistry. I decided to just explore other options, and so I
Right.
left. I wrote up my dissertation. Instead, I wrote up a thesis and said, I'm out of here and I want to try something else.
Yeah. You're like, thank you for this time.
Right?
I have learned that I do not want to do this.
Right. Or I didn't know, but I
Yeah.
remember my dad is a scientist. So, of course he was thrilled that I was getting my doctorate. And I remember the tears swelling up in his eyes. He's like, are you sure you really want to quit? And my professor was like, you could take a year out and come back and finish it. And I go, no, no, no.
Yeah, you're like, the
I need to
decision's
burn
made.
my bridges. I don't want a safety net. No safety net. So I left, and then I started applying for jobs because I had to support myself, and everybody was. And I thought I wanted to do some kind of science, but I wasn't sure what. And so I was applying for different ology jobs, and
Okay.
the biologists were like, "Oh yeah, we could use a chemist to do some chemistry work for us." And I go, "No, that's not what I want to do."
Yeah, you're like, no.
And then my dad had a student who became a professor of mushrooms at the University of Hawaiʻi in Hilo. And he said, Rhonda, why don't you volunteer at this national park, Hawaiʻi Volcanoes? There's a botanist I know, Tim Tunison, who's an amazing guy. Give him a call and see if he'll take you in. And they gave you housing. And I think it was
Wow.
$7 a day stipend, meal stipend. So I thought, oh, this is great,
Yeah, what a gig.
Yeah. And I remember calling him from a phone booth at the bottom in Hilo town. And I remember he had a real laid back voice. And I explained I was interested, but I had no biology background. I didn't know any plants, didn't know species, but that I'd love this opportunity to work in the park. And he said, sure, come on up. So I did. And I remember I think I had one suitcase and a sleeping bag. That was pretty much all I owned at the time. Caught a ride, got into a volunteer house, and then Tim just put me to work. He just threw me in feet first on a number of field projects, and I had to learn my plants really fast. I learned their scientific names as 3-letter acronyms because that's how you would fill them out in notebooks. I just thought it was so amazing to be able to work in these remote, beautiful, natural environments and really immerse yourself and learn and observe your surroundings and try to understand them and do that for a living. And also the overall goals was to understand how these plant communities and ecosystems worked so that you could manage and protect them, which was a great purpose. And I would be able to apply my scientific method that I learned going to college and graduate school, but work outdoors. And the other thing that really drew me was the people I got to work with. They weren't all academics, but they had an amazing understanding of the environment they were in. So, there were a lot of people who grew up in rural areas, farmers, hunters, Native Hawaiians, locals who lived off the land and also worked for the park. and were really keen observers of their environment. And not only did I get to see and learn and observe the environment through their eyes, but I also got to reconnect with local culture, which I loved. And so all of that, just everything seemed to be in place. And I remember one time sitting in this grassland down at the coast, and you know how you hear the wind go through the grass? And it's like waves, and you're eating lunch and you're looking at the ocean, and it was an epiphany. And I knew this is it. This is it. This is where I want to be. I don't think I ever looked back after that.
That's awesome. You ended up, I believe, getting a PhD in botany, correct?
I did. I think I had to, chemistry only takes you so far. You need to take some basic biology and botany courses. And I knew there was a point, if I really wanted to understand these systems, I would need to go back to graduate school. And so I went to the University of Hawaii and I pursued a PhD in plant ecology. And one thing about a graduate program, especially if you're pursuing a dissertation, you have the luxury of really focusing in on a problem and exploring all sides of it, synthesizing that information and trying to distill certain things that you can carry forward with that knowledge. You don't often have, as a grown-up, once you leave college, you don't have that luxury to really explore something and dive deep into it. And so I was lucky to have that experience as well, and then apply it to whatever I did at work.
Was your dissertation related to stuff happening in Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park?
Exactly. So what I looked at was invasive plants. And so these islands evolved in isolation over millions, tens of millions of years, the most remote archipelago in the world. And so only a subset of plants and animals and organisms that you find in the continental system actually made it to the islands. And those that did, they evolved in isolation without a lot of the competitive pressures or the big herbivores or the diseases. Did I say predators? They evolved in a very unique situation and became entirely unique species. So there's a high level of what we call endemism, species that evolve unique to their environment, to this habitat. So we have a high degree of endemism in Hawaii, comparable, if not surpassing, what people talk about in the Galapagos Islands. So you have maybe a honey creeper bird, a small bird that makes it to Hawaii, and then over a couple of million years will speciate into entirely unique bird species found on each of the islands, or even one side of the island, or even like one part of the mountain. And you can see, the whole story of Darwin and adaptive radiation. So scientists from around the world actually come to Hawaii to study that. And it just makes for these really unique flora and fauna. But at the same time, they're incredibly fragile because as humans settled and brought new species in, and then modern modes of land use, deforestation, farming, introduction of animals they'd never seen before, like four-legged ungulates, cows, goats, pigs, or dogs, rats, cats, ants. Just try to imagine what could have gotten here on their own without humans. And you realize that there were no four-legged animals on these islands prior to human arrival. When they brought four-legged animals, there's no way for them to swim over here.
Of course, but that's crazy.
Right. The only terrestrial mammal were bats, and that's because probably a couple of bats got blown over during a big storm event. And you have to imagine there had to be at least two of them.
Right.
And then, they had to actually survive. And so fast forward to modern day, where we have so many new introductions of species and pressures. And so we are often viewed as the extinction capital of the world. Many of the ground nesting birds didn't make it into modern times because of predation from cats and dogs, rodents, humans, mongoose. And so we have a lot of species at risk of extinction because of these new invasive plants and animals. We have a very active resource management program in this park, as do many national parks do now. One of the things we look at are also invasive plants, and that was sort of my specialty as a botanist. We looked at invasive stands of firetree, which were introduced about, maybe 130 years ago, 140 years ago to the islands, and they can grow really quickly, replace the native forest, and you end up with these they grow as monocultures under the right conditions, so nothing else will grow under them. And you'll just have a single species forest. And if you actually look at native rainforest, native Hawaiian rainforest, you'll see it's incredibly diverse. There's species growing under the canopy of ohia trees, which is our main rainforest tree in this park. But you'll see dozens, if not hundreds, of native plant species, ferns, lobeliads, small trees that grow and host a whole array of native insects and forest birds. When these get completely replaced by these monocultures or monostands of firetree, the diversity drops. And so my dissertation really focused on how do you restore areas that have been completely invaded by firetree? Because by that time, if you try to remove the firetree, what will actually come back in its place? Will more firetree come in? Or will some other set of species come in that might outcompete the native species? And so my dissertation was really looking at different ways of removing firetree in a way that would create different post-firetree environment and encourage native, and finding a way that a method that would favor more native rainforest reestablishment than other weeds or firetree. You could do it by manipulating the rate at which you removed firetree. So if you just clear cut and you log the area, you ended up with a lot of weeds. But if you slow killed the firetree by girdling the trunk and allowing it to sort of defoliate and die over the course of a year or two, you tended to get more native rainforest species coming back in. And the thought is they're more adapted to the shaded environment created by the slow kill method.
Would the ohia tree come back usually in that scenario?
There were ohia seedlings that came back, but ohia was very slow. But what you did get was a lot of tree fern and native ferns coming back and early colonizers of native rainforest. So you might get a small tree called mamaki, or you might get pilo, which is another small native tree. And you would also get ohia, but it would take more time to get back in.
And are there different stages of a rainforest or a native area growing back? And so it's like almost as if it's starting over?
Yes. So that's called succession.
That's cool.
There's different stages of succession, and you actually see all different stages of succession of rainforests in Hawaii, depending on, over here, it's when the last lava went over the land. And then, ohia trees, they have a natural lifespan. Don't ask me what it is. But they'll live several hundred years and then die. And then a new cohort of ohia trees will come up, and along with it, a set of species that accompany it, native species, plants and animals.
And is this process of like slow killing the invasive species or invasive trees, is this something that was implemented within Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park?
We did actually start doing it in some of our areas where we were focusing on restoring native rainforests. We definitely have to prioritize where we manage. This park is large, and we can't manage all the invasive species everywhere. And so we really focus on what we call special ecological areas. And so these are areas that represent different types of ecosystems across the park. And they might be hotspots for biological diversity, particularly rare plants and animals. And they might be in relatively good or pristine condition. And so these are the areas we really focus on invasive species management.
It's really cool that kind of your dissertation, you got to actually see some of that be implemented in parts of the park so that's a very special experience. You mentioned at the beginning, obviously, one of the most amazing things of your first day being superintendent. I think just giving folks more context to the types of experiences that can be had in the park. Can you share some favorite experiences you've had?
My favorite are probably my most memorable. And for me, it's the opportunity to immerse yourself in the natural environment. And so hiking, especially when either I'm by myself or in a small group, and going into the backcountry, we have a lot of areas that we define as backcountry where a lot of the average visitors don't go to. Your experience going down to our beach campsites is one of them. And you really feel immersed in that environment and that you're away from the big development footprint. There's no road, there's no buildings really other than the backcountry composting toilet. There's a trail. You can really, you hear the sounds and you're taken out of yourself and you realize there's something larger than you. And anytime I have those opportunities to remind myself I'm taken out of my everyday, those are the best experiences. So I think going down to the remote beach camps are amazing. If you have the opportunity, there's also the mountain backcountry areas. And so if there's an eruption going, you'll look down and you'll see the glow instead of looking up. It's a totally different experience. There's also the East Rift camping, and I was always a little intimidated about camping in the East Rift rainforest until I actually got to do it. And then I really enjoyed it.
What were you intimidated by?
I think the potential to get lost. You don't have landmarks to navigate. It's all forest. So you really need to be a little more experienced, make sure you have all the equipment, the right clothes. People carry GPSs, but it's also good to have a map and a compass as a backup and let people know where you are. And, to pay attention to your surroundings. I really enjoyed the rainforest camping as well. But it's definitely, you have to pay a little more attention.
All these memories, as we're talking about this, obviously all these memories from my trip all those years ago is coming back. And two that I'm remembering are because we were walking along a lot of the lava fields, the trail markers were I forget what it's called, but it would be a pile of rocks.
The ahus?
Yes. And so it was like from one of those, you could see the next one. And that would be the way, rather than just being on a trail with a designated trail and following signs. That was a really unique experience. And then the other piece, which this is the only place I've ever done it, is sleeping outside of the tent. So when we camped on the beach, we would literally just put our sleeping pads and our sleeping bag on the sand. I mean, those memories will be held with me for forever of waking up and seeing the stars in different positions and knowing that was the passage of time, and like waking up at the crack of dawn because there's literally nothing covering your face essentially as you sleep. It was amazing.
Yes. Yeah. I like looking up and seeing the stars when I camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that, because I've camped without like the fly on in a tent before, but you still can't see the stars as vividly. And so sleeping in just a sleeping bag and looking at the stars it was magical.
You don't have to be an avid hiker to have that experience. We actually have a car camping site on Helena Poly Road. And so people can drive up to their campsite, and the night sky there is phenomenal. And you'd feel like you're in the backcountry because there's not a lot of people out there, but you can actually drive there and get a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, that's really awesome. While you were a botanist for the park, we talked a little bit about some invasive species management. What other projects did you work on?
Right. So over the years, my boss was a fire ecologist, Tim. He ended up hiring me and mentoring me. Working with him, I ended up doing a lot of fire science, fire ecology, and I got to go on these wildland fires and study fire behavior and evaluate fire damage, map the fires. I would work with him and we would actually do fire research. We'd measure the recovery of plants after a fire. It expanded on to doing prescribed or research burns to sort of test out, what are the species, native species that can survive fire, because we often end up with a lot of non-native species coming in after fire, especially fire adapted non-native species. And so we asked ourselves, are there actually native species that are tolerant to fire? Maybe they're fire adapted, but are they fire tolerant? And so we actually did research burns to sort of identify a suite of native species that could persist in what we call these new fire regimes. Because what we found among in non-native plants that have come in over the years are fire adapted grasses. And they have really altered the fire regime in areas that they've invaded because they're able to carry fire spread much larger. And then after the fire clears the vegetation, these grasses come in very quickly and outcompete a lot of native plants that come in afterwards. And so you end up with these native shrublands or woodlands being turned into grass savannas with only a few relictual native trees and shrubs persisting. We did a lot of fire research and tried to understand what was happening. And then we came up with a suite of native species we thought could persist in these savannas. And the reason why they might not be there currently is because we had a long 100-year history of non-native goats and cattle in the park that swept through and ate a lot of these plants. And even though we're now fenced and the goats and cattle aren't there, some of these native plants were so few that they weren't able to recover. But some of them actually turned out to be what we call fire tolerant. And so we actually said, hey, let's reintroduce them into these areas and they'll be able to persist in these grass fire cycles. And so we actually do these big restoration projects after wildland fires to reintroduce these species. And I think a lot of other parks in Hawaii are using that same model to do restoration with native species after fire. So yeah, that was fun. It's fun too.
Yeah, that helps. That makes things, that's what keeps you going.
Right.
I guess I'd love to hear about some of the collaborative efforts the park, this putting your superintendent hat back on, collaborative efforts with local communities you have. Specifically, I know you have a cultural festival, so I'd love to hear about that. And then ways you engage with different schools, stuff like that.
We have a outstanding interpretation education program, and the education program, Jody Anastasio is the lead. We have a very popular junior ranger program that people can participate in person, and then she partners with the schools, the grade schools, to do what we call this recent program, Earth, Sea, and Sky. So we work with Loa Astronomy Center and NOAA's Marine Discovery Center. We introduce, I think, primarily fourth grade students to the different aspects of the natural environment, Earth, Sea, Sky. And they see it through the lens of both Western science and through the Native Hawaiian lens. And Native Hawaiians were really keen observers of their environment. We're really expanding and trying to introduce visitors to the park to their perspective of how they observe their surroundings. And so if you actually go to our website, pretty cool. We have story maps where we're rediscovering some of the names, indigenous names of areas throughout the park. We're rediscovering them and restoring those names to these areas. And the story map is part of that opportunity to share that perspective. And it even comes with audio where they help you pronounce the words, because Hawaiian words can be challenging.
This wasn't recorded, but it was me and you going over a lot of the pronunciation so that I said it correctly. So I can see how that would be helpful.
So, yeah, you can go to the park website. You'll get all of that. We do have a lot of opportunities through what we call volunteer stewardship days. And so we invite the communities and schools to work on stewardship projects. That's something we really focus on. We also have a youth ranger program, which is an intern program during the summer. So students in high school can apply, and it'll be maybe their first summer job, and they'll have their first professional experience, and they're taught how to write a resume.
Is that usually local schools in the Hawaii area,
right.
or okay?
It generally is, because we don't offer housing, and it's really for the high school kids. But oftentimes people from the community don't always go to the park or see it as something, as a career. It's similar to myself, and so having that opportunity to work in the park really opens their eyes. And we've actually quite a few individuals who graduated from the program that subsequently ended up with careers in the Park Service. I think we're in our 15th year.
Wow, that's so cool.
And then our partners too, our friends of Hawaiʻi Volcanoes, they have a Guardians of the Trail program, which is sort of complementary to our youth ranger. And they'll also have students working on projects in the park and learning about job opportunities and careers in the Park Service.
It's a testament to how impactful the jobs must be if there is that high transition from folks doing these programs, either volunteering like you did or doing a youth program, and then ending up working in the park full time. And I think that's a common storyline across the Park Service, because it's just a pretty cool honor to be able to work to preserve these amazing places. So it's cool that that was your experience. Then you get to see that through the different programs.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about the cultural festival?
So our cultural festival, it's our 40th. So not our 40th anniversary, it's our 40th, because there are a few years in there where we weren't able to hold it. And that's a big number.
That is a big number.
This year, we're going to commemorate our founders. It's going to be in our Kahuku unit, which is located in Ka'u. And every year it's really great. We have practitioners from the community share their skills, and people get to hands-on participate and learn. There's the hala weaving or lei making, and there's also games, Hawaiian games, and our staff and our partners and volunteers all help put that on, and it's a big deal. We have halaus or hula groups from the community and musicians, so it's pretty fun. It's this Saturday.
It's this Saturday, really?
Yes, it's this Saturday. I'm looking forward to it.
How timely. I guess by the time we publish this episode, it will have happened. Yeah. Maybe like a month.
It'll be there next year.
But yeah, that's awesome. I guess we talked about at the very beginning a lot of the volcanic activity monitoring and everything like that. Obviously, that is extremely unique to your national park. Are there any other things you deal with as superintendent that you feel like are unique to Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park?
I'll probably elaborate more on the volcano, because it's not only the volcano adapting our operations to whatever the volcano is doing and where it's doing it, but it's also consequences from the volcano itself. So in 2018, where we had this massive migration of the magma out of Kīlauea crater, we ended up with a lot of earthquake damage. We were fortunate that it didn't just drain and there was this huge summit collapse. Instead, there were just a lot of shaking and shuddering as the ground above the empty magma chamber settled. So it would sort of...
Is the summit where the crater is?
Yes. The magma chamber below the crater floor, when it emptied, the crater floor started collapsing. And it collapsed through a series of shakes that lasted several months. And so we would have twos, threes, fours magnitude. In the summit area, dozens and dozens of them every day, even a 5.0 almost once a day. The park had to close the summit area because of all the shaking. We had road damage, sinkholes showing up, some cracks in the buildings, especially the buildings closest to the edge of the crater. We had our water lines burst. Our water systems were old, right? And then we would have, power outages because trees would fall on the electrical lines. And so in the aftermath, once all of it had died down, we had to really focus on what we needed to do in terms of infrastructure repairs so that we could reopen the park. And so it's, water line repairs, some road repair, especially the main highway, which was one of the main arteries connecting the west and the east side of the island. We worked with the county and the state and federal highways to repair the sinkholes on that side. And then we had to make some decisions about what the buildings themselves and do building assessments. And so for most part, we could do repairs, but again, the buildings right on the edge, right above where the crater floor collapsed, suffered the most damage. And we had to make the difficult decision to not fix those buildings, but to actually remove them. And we also made the decision not to build new buildings there because of how precariously, in the long term, having them that close to the edge, it just didn't seem like a wise investment. And so we did a lot of engagement with the public and, of course, the USGS scientists about what we would do in that area in terms of restoring it, and also where would we replace those lost functions. And so we're actually building a new USGS Hawaiian Volcanoes Observatory field station, a smaller field station in the park, but further back from the edge of the crater. And then my understanding is they're building a bigger research building down in Hilo, which is outside of the park, 25 miles away, which will serve as their primary hub. Our visitor center that didn't suffer damage and is further away from the edge of the crater is going to be remodeled to convert the administrative spaces into more visitor space, because the building that we had there, which basically served as a second visitor center, it was called Jagger Museum. That one was badly damaged. And so we're removing it. Right now we're removing it. And so what will be instead left there will be the observation deck remain. We're going to fix it and actually expand it into the footprint of the Jagger Museum. So there'll be more viewing area, but the buildings won't be there. And I think it's a good cycle because that area is amongst the most sacred areas to Indigenous Hawaiians. It's the top of Kīlauea summit, so a sacred area in itself. And restoring it to more natural conditions by removing those buildings, I think, is an appropriate thing to do. And so if you come back maybe a year and a half from now, you'll see a very different profile in that area. We call it Ue Kahuna. It'll be different. It'll be more like how it was.
What a beautiful thing to be restoring a place too.
And then we'll have this, hopefully a new visitor center exhibit and a larger space to provide orientation to visitors, and especially 24-hour, given how much people come up to the park at night when we have an active volcano.
Like you said, that creates unique operations. As we're wrapping up on our time, I have a fun question, kind of like a silly, these have all been fun, but a sillier question. And then a question I ask every superintendent. What is your favorite? You've shared that you've gone camping and hiking. Do you have a favorite snack you like to bring?
So I was a horrible junk food person. So I would typically go in the field and bring cans of cola with me. I would have like 3 cola days, 4 cola days. Sometimes if I was working out there, 5 cola days. And then I'd also bring I like to bring Portuguese sweetbread. It's just gray bread. and maybe some cheddar cheese and hard salami because they don't melt. Yeah, it's good in the hot sun, and then you wash it down with some cola. So that's what I used to do. But now that I'm older, now that I'm older, it's water. So water or sparkling water, sparkling water, and
Oh, that's
then
funny.
I don't know, fruit. You know, like an orange, apples.
Yeah, it sounds healthier.
Much healthier. Yeah.
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 I
Multi-grain
like
bread.
yeah. I like reminiscing on your junk food days though.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
fun.
I'm pretty notorious.
That's awesome. You're like, yeah, everyone knows.
Yes.
The question I like to ask every superintendent is what is something you wish everyone knew about Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park, regardless of if they have or haven't been?
Just how varied it is. It's, you know, I'd say 95% of our visitors go to the summit area, look at the volcano, look at the crater, and then they leave, and they don't realize the amazing landscapes and how varied they are. When people think of Hawaii, they think of palm trees or rainforest, and then they get here, and if they look around, they'll go, oh my gosh, there's desert. Or we had Secretary Holland, Department Secretary of Interior, she came out and we took her out to the Southwest Rift, and the colors there, it's like a desert, cinder desert with reds, browns, grays, blacks, ash. And she looked at me and she was like, this is like New Mexico. And I go, yes, you're right. We have a lot of different experiences. And then if you go Mauka, up the mountain, you will go into subalpine and woodland.
Wow. That's so crazy.
You don't even think of Hawaii landscapes when you go up there. You're just completely like, I had no idea this existed. Give yourself more than half a day to see the park. I would give yourself at least two days, or if you're going to count, give yourself a lot more. You spent a week and you only got to see one section of the park. So
I know. We spent, I think, like 1 or 2 days staying it was in the national park. I don't know what they were called, but they were like little cabins.
oh, Namakani Pio.
Yes, we stayed there, I think, for 2 nights and got to do some like day hiking and go to the summit and stuff like that. But yeah, we didn't go up into the alpine regions at all. We didn't go into the rainforest. So I guess I have to go back, is what I'm hearing.
You have to go back. You have to go back.
Yeah. Darn. Oh, bummer.
Right. And
Twist
Kahuku
my
unit.
arm and all.
Right. We have this whole unit, Kahuku unit, which is we acquired in 2003 and it's been open since 2010. That's a whole nother area. It's about halfway between Pu'uhonua now, which is another national park, and our
Okay.
summit entrance here. So it's about 45-minute drive along the highway towards the south of the island. And that is pretty amazing place too. It's very English pastoral is what people say.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I guess
Yeah.
I'll have to go myself and report back.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing. It's always really special when I value every superintendent's conversation. And at the same time, it's really special when I get to talk with superintendents who have been at that park for an extended period of time, and just the knowledge that you have over this place and the appreciation and love is so evident. So thank you. It was really fun to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. Don't forget to subscribe down below and tell your friends about it. This ensures that we can continue telling the stories of our national parks. Check out everything Who Runs This Park does at Linktree/Who Runs This Park. That's linktr.ee/Who Runs This Park. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.